Evolving in Asia and their impact. To Mr. Matthew Welsh, partner of Asia Capital and Advisors. Thank you.
Good. Thanks very much indeed, Farah. So Paul Bradley might well be known to a number of you. He has a long and illustrious history in logistics and supply chain in Asia. He is also, I should say, an old friend, and it's pure coincidence that I find myself introducing him. I think Paul cut his teeth out of Hong Kong with Li and Fung in the old days as China was entering the world economy. And he was the MD there of IDS, which I think had been Inchcape, isn't that right?
Yes.
Yes, it was the old Inchcape. Then he was president of an Indian logistics company called Asia International, which is a leading Indian multinational. It does supply chain management, logistics parks, and rail freight within India. So he served first at Li and Fung, then at Asia. He's now chairman and CEO of his own company, Caprica International. And additionally, he's vice chairman, I think, of Supply Chain Asia, which is an industry body across Asia, which tries to represent the interests of the logistics and supply chain industry. He's an engaging speaker, as I hope we're going to hear. And I think he wants to give a talk which is challenging the norms of the industry, talking about what kind of innovation there is, what the future looks like. And I would encourage everybody in the audience as he speaks to please think of questions for him at the end. So with that, and also at the World Economic Forum, he was voted a new Asian leader. So there, proper introduction for you, Mr. Bradley.
Thank you, Matthew. Very fast. Appreciate being here this afternoon, and since you've all had lunch, I have the great pressure of keeping you awake for the next hour. I should have had an espresso for each of you. Yeah, I'd first like to just mention before I get started that I'm on the board of Supply Chain Asia, and Dr. Robert Yap, who spoke earlier today, is the chairman and a real visionary in our industry. And Peter Woon from Marina Bay Sands, who's managing a pretty amazing structure and new models as well, has just joined the board as well. We're an organization made up, nonprofit, of all the major logistics players, manufacturers, and with magazines, conferences. And the idea is to build the next generation of supply chain leaders in a collaborative environment. I think over today and tomorrow, you have a lot of technical experts sharing a lot of very valuable information on supply chain and logistics. So I'm going to break the rule, and I would rather divert you for the next hour to the future. Where's the market going? What are some radical things already being done in the industry? And why isn't the banking community taking advantage of it yet? So that came up a little bit earlier in your panel, and I'm going to argue that if you're a professional in logistics, you're way behind because the market is moving that radically. And if you're in banking and you're still dealing with traditional trade finance, you're decades behind. There's huge opportunities for transformation, and I just want to take a brief window to show you some of that and actually share with you some case studies of actual things that are being done for different companies. So we'll start with that. When I look at the industry, this is something I created years ago, because I'm always frustrated that in the market people use the wrong words. So when a truck driver paints his truck integrated logistics, and then a year later he paints his truck supply chain management services, but I still see a truck. But what Robert's done as a good example is he's taken that company and turned it into a real integrated logistics company. So we really need to articulate what is logistics, what is freight forwarding, what is supply chain, what is demand chain, and where we go in the future, dynamic value networks, which is at a whole different level. So semantics matters. And most of the industry is still in this space. I'll leave out the names, but even the largest global companies, they're still in this space, and they're just starting to probe into this area of real supply chain management. Not moving product around the world, but managing multidimensional components of it. And then you move to demand chain, where you literally will take something off a shelf in a Walmart store, and it'll be replenished within 15 minutes. And it'll trigger an entire demand order going back across the world without even realizing it. It's already happening. And then what Dr. John Gatorn and I have positioned in a book a few years ago is it's not even a chain anymore. It's a dynamic value network. And in all the different industries, we don't have platforms anymore. They're all networks, and they're all converging. And if you can manage across these, which sounds very theoretical, so I'll try to make it more interesting in a minute, but if you see how every industry is turning into networks and orchestration, the real opportunity is to sit above that and to manage these different spaces. Not only supply chain, but manufacturing, financial flow. All of these aspects are integrating, and they're not even fixed anymore. Sometimes they're variable. And I'll give you case studies in a few minutes to show what I mean. We're really moving into an era of dynamic value networks, and the industry is still training professional logisticians. And the banking industry, since we're at that conference, and I'm also on the board of an investment bank right now, the banking industry is still looking at this from a traditional vantage point, with few exceptions. So I think there's a huge opportunity in both platforms to break out in the next few years. First thing, virtual business. Meaning not real? No, it's real. We have seen in the last few years a complete new introduction of virtual businesses, disintermediating traditional businesses. By the way, China's e-business is 5 times larger already than the United States market, even though it's not even mature yet. That's how fast things are evolving. So virtual retail, Zappos, eBay, Amazon. Now in China, there's going to be another IPO coming up on the New York Stock Exchange, which will be at about $50 billion valuation from Chinese e-tailer. So do you need the assets, or do you need a way of developing the product? You can even go online and you can have an avatar of yourself. And you can actually try on clothes on the avatar. The technology is already there. And then when you order online, you already know it fits. You already saw what it looked like. You just didn't have to take off your clothes and put new clothes on. It's real. The airlines. If I call Singapore Airlines up till 6, I'm getting a Singapore Airlines desk. If I call after that, I'm getting India. But the same office in India is serving about 50 other companies. So virtual customer service, it's been around, but it's really moving at a whole different level. Virtual offices. So you're a small business. Do you really need an office? Just next door is Regus, even here. Regus has offices around the world. You can rent space, you can just show up and use a cubicle, or you can even have your own fixed office within the virtual office. Up to you. There are whole networks of this. In the new economy, you don't need the fixed office. You can have the virtual office. And then your fixed cost isn't there, and it leaves more room for profit and maneuvering room. Big trend with mid-sized companies now. Why is this not working? Sorry? Do I need to do it manually, or is this working? Okay, sorry. And virtual medicine. Go online, you have thousands of doctors integrated. They can already give you medical advice. I met with someone from Silicon Valley, and if you actually touch the phone, they can already diagnose part of your medical condition on an iPhone. And they actually invested about $20 million in that new technology as a startup. So virtual medicine, the cloud, virtual tech infrastructure. You don't need to hold your information. You can store it in the virtual world. And virtual space programs. So the government's outsourcing space to other companies. And Elon Musk, who's one of my great heroes, with the Tesla car and PayPal and so many other things, he has already launched, 2 of his spaceships have already docked with a space station, already. One about 2 months ago. And he's already working on a rocket ship to take private individuals to Mars by 2030. So already virtual space is already docked with a space station twice. It's moving this fast. Virtual reality is also 3D manufacturing. Do I need to ship and move something? Or can I just materialize it like the old Star Trek? Press a button and it prints out. But we're not only printing product, we're printing food already. They're already experimenting on the space station using 3D manufacturing to print food. They're already working at some of the top medical laboratories to print organs. So where do we go with this? Will you ship a product, or will it? I'm doing something with one of the governments in Asia, and we're actually planning how to hub regionally 3D manufacturing for rapid disbursement across 3 or 4 countries, but beyond that it won't work because it's too long a distance. This is coming very fast. These are actually for blind people. They cost $300 to make, and now they're produced anywhere in the world on your desk for $30, all in. No transport costs, nothing. It's Braille, a Braille telephone actually. $30 instead of $300. Not bad. So, I don't want to talk about a chain of things interacting and moving because that's the past. I want to talk about the flow. Why do we talk about chains and connecting, trucking and warehouses and unstuffing and stuffing? The technology provides visibility across the entire network. Therefore, it shouldn't be a chain anymore. It should be a flow. And product changes form while it's flowing around the world. Dell was an early adopter of that. And others have followed. So product can change form while it's flowing across the globe. And I'll mention something we did in Lianfeng for Fortune 100 companies out of Southeast Asia. McDonald's. God, I hate to admit this, it's 18 years ago. And 18 years ago, when I didn't have these circles under my eyes from our industry, I was involved with the McDonald's supply chain. And we implemented a thing called the floating warehouse. And what we did was, back in those ancient days, we thought, how do we play with inventory? And so the idea that you either have to buy food and cups and all these items in every country close to market, or you're going to aggregate the whole world volume and you're going to place super orders of 5 billion cups with a couple manufacturers. And so what we did was we tracked every product as a product, not as a BL, not as a container, but as a product. We spread it out over 5 shipping lines. We diverted transit through Taiwan so we could change the destination while it was moving for $100 extra. And with Javi, we kept 7 to 14 days inventory in every country of Asia. At that time for 5,800, now 13,500 restaurants. And every restaurant holds 1 day inventory. Every country, 7 to 10 days stock. And the Pacific Ocean is where we kept the cargo. And so we used the water as a floating warehouse to reduce storage costs by $60 million US. Why not? So you can see the transformation. And so we had free storage for most of the product's movement, and their competitors were paying for it. We reduced duty payments, we held minimal stock, and we used it as a competitive edge. This is something Mr. Mittal and I built in India called Integrated Free Trade Warehousing Zones, 350-acre logistics parks, cities in the middle of India. These parks basically do packaging, repackaging, relabeling, value-added activities, and we connected them by rail, a railroad artery. So we basically planted islands in India and integrated them by rail. 2 operational. Regional SCM hubbing. Yes, it's not good English, but I made up the word about 10 years ago. Hubbing. Regional SCM hubbing is where you bring product manufactured from different areas, you feed it into a single hub, you then repackage, relabel, do partial manufacturing, and then you disperse it across the region. So we were doing major Fortune 100 companies out of Singapore and feeding 14 countries, 3 days to Bangkok, 5 days to Hong Kong, 7 days to Shanghai, 9 days to Tokyo. And we basically dispersed the product to them just in time. So every country could reduce their holding to about 15, 20 days instead of what they used to have, 2 months. This was the hub we used. This is an inefficient supply chain. This is integrating with a 4PL, where we basically will insert ourselves, we'll manage every factory purchase order, we'll integrate it, and then we'll execute it neutrally on behalf of the customer. But you need visibility. You need to integrate all of the different touch points, all of the different companies that are involved with the supply chain. And so software comes in. But if I can track product like the airplane cockpit, a dashboard, and I can see everything moving on my product flow across the world in my cockpit just in time. We had a software where you could sit at Starbucks in New York, and you could go online and you could look at your cargo in Bombay, and you could take control of the camera and you could actually zoom in and watch them while they're packaging your product, while you're having a latte, preferably white chocolate. So if you have visibility to that level, you don't need to hold so much inventory. It changes form, it's transforming, and this affects working capital. That's the point. So my argument, it shouldn't be a chain. Why are we at a supply chain conference today? It should be a flow and networks that are integrating. So the information flow allows us to go from shipping to creating an integrated product flow. And that product can change forms. And therefore, inventory changes value. And I can use that to play with my working capital and my price of landed product. And that becomes a financial flow that I can manipulate the value of product while it's flowing across the globe. Is there a clock here?
No, the clock is not working. It's 5 to 4.
Okay. So now we have another trend, and that is manufacturing. We started having a factory in a country to produce product for that country. Then we went to regional manufacturing. So one factory in Indonesia produces toothpaste for all of Asia. And the one in Indonesia produces soap for all of Asia, as an example. And today, Lian Feng being a good example, we have virtual manufacturing. Virtual manufacturing means, what if I don't need to own the factory? What if I buy the excess capacity of a factory and I integrate it and I control the network and I integrate factories that make all different products and you're at 70% capacity, so I'll buy 30% of your unused capacity. And I'll integrate it with my own people, and I'll even aggregate the buying of raw material because now I have bigger volume than you do. So we actually have virtual manufacturing. The largest manufacturer in the world today, in terms of factories, is Li & Fung, with 15,000 factories in 60 countries, producing everything from Calvin Klein to Ralph Lauren to Walmart products to Bed Bath & Beyond to Coca-Cola promotional items to Disney toys. They don't own a single factory, but they're the largest manufacturer in the world. How did that happen? Hundreds of billions of dollars of product value. Now here's my challenge to the banks. If a neutral entity like a Li & Fung or a YCH, large size, if that company can become the integrator, then you can literally take product as it's feeding to factories, and as it leaves the factories, why does that have to show up on the books of the branded company? So the neutral entity can take control of the product as it leaves the factories, feed it through the floating warehouses, feed it through the regional SCM hubs, integrating all of this, and feeding just in time to the retail. And the branded company will guarantee that whatever is not sold, they'll buy back in the end. So you've neutralized the risk. Now you bring a bank in to finance the value of that inventory while it moves across transformation. And they can charge a management fee because there's a value. You've taken it off the books of the company. Major transformation, but the banks aren't doing it yet. Why not? Virtual manufacturing. 7,000 retailers, 15,000 virtual factories, 60 countries. Li & Fung. And what is Apple? Hold up an Apple phone, 2 people. Fine, that's Shanghai. That's Los Angeles. I used to move music and movies and books. And now you press a button and it's in your pocket. And now it's university lectures. Knowledge is becoming part of the chain. Lectures are moving across that flow around the world. So now we have the press of a button, product is moving. And Apple was one of the knowledge network orchestrators. 300,000 developers in every country of the world. I don't pay you your salary. You absorb your own. You work from your house or office, I don't care. But if I give you access to my iTunes network and someone buys your product, I will take 30% of everything that's sold. So you pay me, and I have no costs. And Apple has 300,000 employees that they pay nothing to. But they get 30% of everything made because they are the knowledge network orchestrator. And they sold 60 billion downloads so far, as of yesterday. That's a supply chain that turned into an integrated flow, that turned into a dynamic value network. And Steve Jobs saw that early. He's a genius. And Victor Fung saw that early. And Jeff Bezos from Amazon basically said, as Robert brought up today, I actually want to own the warehouses, but I'm going to aggregate everyone's product. But guess what? He doesn't own any of the product in those warehouses. So he's building regional SCM hubs, and he's allowing you to have your product there, but he then disperses it. So he's controlling the physical arteries, but he never takes title to the product. Damn clever. Welcome to the new economy. Except for this. You need to do it manually then? Okay. This is the old economy, fighting. So my big thing is it's knowledge network orchestration. I'm just going to keep repeating it because I love it and it applies to everything now. If you control the network and you have the knowledge how to leverage it and integrate it, then you're the orchestrator. And in the new economy, the value goes to the orchestrator. Look at every single industry, that's where it's going to move to. There's a major retailer in London, and then they have an online retailer, and the online retailer just got triple the net profit of the physical retailer. And they were shocked. Why? Because the other retailer has no assets. They have virtual stores. And they're saying, how does a company that's been around for 100 years make less money with all these beautiful stores at Knightsbridge and everywhere else? Because the virtual company was everywhere. And they knew how to orchestrate. Victor Fung and his team, 30,000 people, control 15,000 factories. And tomorrow they can make it 20,000. And they can change the product. If there's a strike, I'll give you a real example. There was a strike shirts were being made in China to go to the East Coast of the United States about 12 years ago. And you had a window to sell them, and otherwise you've missed that whole pre-Christmas period. So Li and Fung did what anyone does in manufacturing. They just flipped all the manufacturing to Costa Rica with 10 days notice, made all the shirts for 3 different brands out of Costa Rica and shipped it into the East Coast and captured the sales. And when the strike was over on the West Coast port of the United States, they flipped back to the factories in China because factories are virtual. Someone who has to own the physical, but you want to be the orchestrator. Is there value to that? It's probably why they're producing so many toys and electronics and wine refrigerators, etc. It's the new economy. And now Steve Jobs has taken it to another level. And who else? It's evolving in ways we can't define. Now, when finance integrates with the virtual manufacturing, and the way we execute the product movement becomes more dynamic, we will completely transform the way business is done across the world. I've been talking about individual flows. Imagine when the three converge. It's happening. So, to me, Apple is not making cool phones. They're making you buy the warehouse and carry it with you. And then they're controlling the real value, which is the flow, the network, the orchestration. The banker of the future needs to exploit these evolving opportunities and therefore needs to create new generation of financing solutions. And we're talking today earlier about improving the way we manage traditional finance. That's 20-year-old stuff. This is the opportunity. Now, if I take inventory off the books and it's flowing and transforming and I'm the bank and I can finance that and get a management fee, that's hundreds of billions of dollars, even trillions, but no one's touched it yet. So many of those opportunities are coming. And then I'm going to argue, probably because I'm involved in some projects in that space right now, that as we look at the high cost of urbanization, 60% of China's population will move into cities as part of the government's plan over the next 20 years in China, with 1.38 billion people. In India, having lived in Bombay for a while, you can just see the buildup. And now we look at Singapore and Hong Kong, the cost of real estate. So I'm going to argue that in the future, warehousing, value-added activities, manufacturing, R&D will all be integrated into single buildings even. And you can have a single building in certain urban areas where part of it is underground to leverage the value of land. So I could have the warehousing underground, I could have the factory above it underground, and literally the product is there. Now what if I built hubs like we did in India, except I'm building them smaller, tighter, but I'm building them vertically instead of horizontally. So the same plot ratio of land, I can now flip something like this to this. And I can literally create a cluster of different factories and different warehouses, all integrated and cross-leveraging but in the heart of urban areas or on the periphery, where land is too expensive as we go forward. Why? Because we need to squeeze costs. Why? Because we need to squeeze working capital. Why? Because you're going to be competing with 3D manufacturing. I'm not sure what 4D is yet. I need to go look that up after today's discussion. 4D in Singapore is a lottery, by the way. So I'm going to argue that factories and warehouses in integrated logistics parks can be underground, value-added centers, and then you literally have office buildings above it. You even have shopping malls above it. You even have residential housing above it. And suddenly, you've transformed the industry again. And you've had a new way of playing with costs. But that's not enough because it's not all here. Part of it is virtual now, as you know. Part of what you make is scattered around the world and changing and transforming. So I not only have to integrate all of this into certain vertical space, I also need to connect it to the virtual network of virtual manufacturing, because some of the things I can do here, some of it I need to do in other places. In the other places, it may be good in China this year and it may be better in Thailand next year. And now with martial law for a little while in Thailand, I may need to move it to Vietnam for a little while. So part of what you do is in the integrated space. Part of what you do will be virtual, but controlling and orchestrating. Another part will be press a button and it'll materialize through 3D printing, which is only starting. But who will control this? The orchestrator. So I always think of the conductor, and here are all these brilliant musicians, and I had the privilege of going years back to see when we had the World Economic Forum here, and it was fantastic to see the Symphony Orchestra of Malaysia at the Petronas Concert Hall. Spectacular. But there was the conductor, and he doesn't play any instrument, but he's in control. And all these brilliant players, their value is marginalized until it's integrated through the way the conductor leverages their talent. Welcome to the new economy. That's where we're going. And if that's how manufacturing evolves, you know, if right now books and movies and university lectures materialize in your pocket through iTunes and other things, what else? What if you have a printer at your house in 5 years and it can print your clothing? We're in trouble if we're thinking traditional logistics. So if I'm a bank, I'm thinking, how will I finance a whole new generation of infrastructure? The old infrastructure scattered, spread out on expensive land. Is that going to be able to compete with vertically integrated, converging infrastructure? No. So banks have a new way to invest in an integrated infrastructure. Banks have a new opportunity to fund the flow of product as it's transforming and converging. Banks have an opportunity to become integrators in a more creative space. And if we didn't have the financial crisis, which so many have suffered under, I think banks may have even wanted to buy over logistics companies to completely integrate the service. Now we won't talk about that because it's off the radar for now. Maybe later it will be. But at some point, even banks and logistics entities may integrate because of that convergence of the flow. And so many opportunities you can exploit, but they're not unstuffing, stuffing, terminal handling charge. That was when I started in the industry with APL and NYK too many years ago. We're way beyond that. So at this conference, you're having a lot of thought leaders and amazing experts, Starbucks being one of my favorites, because they've just done amazing things over the years. And because I love the white chocolate maca every day, otherwise I couldn't do anything. But so many new models are evolving. But the banks haven't even touched it, because I'm wondering, do they even understand this space? So we already tried 10 years ago when I was in Lian Fong to partner with some banks and say, how about we control the 4PL? I set up the first 4PL company in Asia, by the way, for Li and Fung years ago. And we actually did things for major companies like Gillette, Sara Lee, Diageo, et cetera. And it was fun, but we had to be neutral. So we even had to be neutral from Li and Fung. We created a separate company, arm's length, just to be neutral. And we would even work with competitors of Li and Fung's warehousing. Li and Fung has a company that owns warehouses, but we would even work with competitor warehouses and lease space from them because we had to be neutral. And you know how that supply chain worked? All costs are open. No spreads on anything. We aggregate the buying of freight across multiple companies. If the customer has a better rate, we use theirs. If we get a better rate, they use ours. But it's all open, nothing hidden. And so we would charge actual costs, warehousing, stuffing, storage, shipping, everything. And then we would charge a management fee because we were providing a value worth paying a premium for. And every year we could show them how much we would reduce their working capital and their sales order forecast gaps that they used to have. So we would have to define these areas. And if we could show them our value, we could have a management fee, and we could even have gain sharing on the savings. So that's the model that already evolved 10 years ago, and it's going faster. So my argument is we're in a really exciting new space, but we need to start educating the leaders of the future to exploit this space. It's a very small number who actually get it. And it's moving. Nothing will stop this. It's moving forward. It's already happening. I'm already working with one government that's already planning their 20-year forward strategy. 20 years forward, they're already planning it out. Just like Malaysia did years ago. Just like Hong Kong's done, like Singapore does so frequently. You're literally planning the infrastructure and technologies 20 years in the future to support this. But everything you know and think about logistics, integrated logistics, supply chain management, it's dead. It's the past. And if you're still thinking about that 5 or 10 years from now, you hopefully are near retirement stage because you're missing the opportunity of the future. And if you start to understand it, you know what? You get to create it. You get to define it. Because a lot of this has just happened in the last few years. And a lot of us, like Robert, myself, especially Victor Fung and Bezos at whole different levels, they're making it up as they go along. But when technology converges, when physical product converges, when manufacturing transforms, and we have all these flows, there is no chain anymore, except in your thinking. And we can now create a whole new world of dynamic value networks. So I hate the word supply chain because I think it's 20 years old. And I still think if a truck paints the word on a truck, it's still a truck. Because most of that value isn't in the truck. It's globally integrated beyond anything we can see or imagine. And out of nowhere, now we have things like Spotify and Netflix. They don't own the product, but in Spotify, they're actually mixing different people's music. And then they're selling you different mixes. You want to have dinner music. You click it. By the way, I'm bringing this up because I think it's part of the value network. I don't think it has to be a physical product from a factory. I think Apple proved that. So suddenly Spotify is outmaneuvering iTunes, and they're saying, I'm going to blend different music, and I'm going to have your dinner music, your beach music, your party music, and you do it, and here's your whole choice of integrated albums, so you don't even have to do that anymore. And Netflix, which doesn't own any products except 2 TV shows, one which is really good, but not out here in Asia, and Netflix doesn't own any of these things, but they're now controlling that network. And they're going to have huge value of billions of dollars because of it. And that's also in our space, because now what we manage is no longer physical product, but virtual product. Because it wasn't that long ago when I was shipping CDs for movies and music and books. So we're at a really exciting stage of transformation, and I think it's appropriate that we're doing it at a banking and finance conference. Because It's not just manufacturing, it's not just physical execution, it's also financial flow and information flow. And all four of these need to converge. And as they do, we completely redefine the way business is done across the globe. And whoever gets that first will be defining the new business models of the future. So that's my conclusion. Everything you know is old, and everything you need to know is in front of us. And we're all learning at the same time, but what an exciting window of opportunity to exploit. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that, Paul. It just, as the moderator that's supposed to do the 30-second summary of the speech, it just keeps getting worse. My brain is sort of exploding.
But you're
here
really
with
good at it. We know that, Matthew.
all that stuff. Well, I think actually the first slide that Paul put up, where he showed, I don't know if you've got it actually, from traditional logistics going to integrated logistics, and then where traditional logistics is the warehouse and the truck, and then integrated logistics is the warehouse and the truck with IT, and then the supply chain management, but that's a push thing from the manufacturing, and then you've got your demand chain management, and then you get to your dynamic value networks. And then I think you demonstrated how the dynamic value network can even go further into a sort of knowledge network, and you gave us the examples. 3 stood out, for me anyway. One was Li and Fung having 15,000 factories in 60 countries, and it's the largest manufacturer in the world, but it doesn't actually own a single factory. And the other one was McDonald's, with the rather interesting idea of shipping the stuff across the Pacific, so you're using the ships as floating warehouses.
18 years old, so they have to be doing a lot better today.
And finally, you talked about Apple, where, I mean, you say you used to ship CDs. We all forget this. Actually, we used to ship VHS tapes, the great big bloody things. I have a closet in my house full of them. We all used to move them around. And that has, now we have iPhones or computers or whatever, and so music, and obviously the next thing will be movies, will all be downloaded automatically, and so you won't actually have to physically ship any goods. And this will have very significant implications in changing the way the value is assigned across the networks. I think that's sort of what you were talking about.
There are a few people who could have absorbed all of that and put it back so succinctly.
Well, the trouble is,
I'm trying to...
Matthew
was doing this, you would have only been here 5 minutes instead of having to endure 15 minutes with me.
I'm trying to understand what it means, although I have one very good idea from his talk. Everybody in this room that's involved in logistics and supply chain, you should all steal his first chart, and you should go to your bosses and say, I used to be a logistics guy and I was paid $100,000. Now I'm a dynamic value network manager and I should be paid $500,000. But maybe I can, we've got, it's 20 past, we've got 10 minutes. Maybe I can open up for questions.
Could I just add one comment? It's, you know, we never had heads of supply chain running global companies in the past. I'm going to argue that Steve Jobs is a supply chain guy. In reality, he's just brilliant. Victor Fung is clearly supply chain. Michael Dell is clearly supply chain. The last 2 CEOs of Walmart were the heads of supply chain at Walmart before they were promoted. So I think real supply chain, you have such a view of the company that's a whole nother career breakout where you can move into CEO positions, which in the past never would have been considered. And
also it's become such an important value creator for companies that it's really a CEO type of issue. Yeah. Questions? I hope that was a thought-provoking talk. Are there any questions from the audience for Mr. Bradley? Because if not, it seems to me that the obvious question from what he's talking about is who are the winners and who are the losers Because, I mean, banks, for example, are they going to lose out in this because payments are going to move to telephone, mobile payments? Or who do you see as the big winners and the big losers in this thing?
See, I wouldn't define it as like banks will be the loser. I think those banks that choose to be the innovators will actually have a whole new growth opportunity. And those who don't get it and stick to the traditional letters of credit and the normal thing, they'll suddenly find they're disintermediated in that space. Everything that I talked about is about disintermediation. I talked about who did this, but think who didn't do it. They're not around anymore, their value collapsed. So I think the payment methodology is changing dramatically. You know, even in Singapore, it started in the US, you just take a photograph of your check and it's immediately deposited in your bank. You don't have to physically deposit the check anymore. So really? That's changed. There's a whole service that's changed. So some banks are going to have divisions. If I was doing official bank, I would have a division to lead cutting-edge new solutions. And that group would be in charge of studying all of these trends and trying to exploit it for financial value. And I think those are the banks that, because of their size and breadth, will be able to really turn this into a whole new financial opportunity. But those who are traditional won't. If I'm a manufacturer, I'm going to have to really start thinking. You know, I remember a few years, okay, I can say this now, about 10 years ago, the CEO of Sara Lee at the time came out to Hong Kong on his private jet with a board of directors, and they sat in the room with William Fong at the time and myself, and he said, you know, I have factories in Brazil, in Detroit, in Germany, in London, in France, in Mexico City. I have all these factories, 30 factories around the world, and you could see every board member leaning up in their chair and nodding. You could feel the ego coming through. And just as he finished that, he said, and they're in all the wrong damn countries today. They have no value to me anymore, and I'm stuck with these factories for the next 20 years because I borrowed money to make them. And they're not competitive anymore because of currency, because of labor, because of political situations, and I'm stuck with them. So in the future, even if you want to make your core product, what are you going to do? You may have a few factories that are your special area, super high value that you don't want anyone to touch, but you better be able to scale long term. And then you're going to integrate it to a virtual factory network. Apple doesn't own a single factory, do they? Not one. It's all virtual. So I think everyone gets impacted by this, but there's a whole new opportunity for every single group. If I'm a factory, I'm going to try to figure out how to be the aggregator. And I'm going to say, I'm making this product, but I'm so good at it. So actually, one guy quit Li and Fong. He was doing tech, and he set up a factory in southern China. And he basically got Apple and Dell and Samsung and all these guys to be sourcing from his one factory, and he thought he can sustain it for quite a while. So that's quite clever.
Okay. So in other words, there are no automatic winners and losers to this, but it's a very dynamic, evolving environment, and we all need to understand it so that we can take advantage of the opportunities. So please join me in thanking Mr. Paul Bradley. Very thought-provoking speech.
Thank you. Good.
A big thank you to our presenter and our moderator. Our next session, ladies and gentlemen, will be a joint session, The Changing Face of How Trade Finance is Supporting Supply Chain. It is a shared session with the International Banking Conference, meaning it will be held in Conference Hall 1, just outside and to the left. So if you would please be so kind to follow the ushers outside to Conference Hall 1 to join the other delegates there. Thank you. You can also follow me as well. I'll be going there.